Alrighty, good evening. Welcome to NycosRPG and Game Master's Guide. Tonight we're going to be taking a little bit of a walk into the games groups that you have at your table. And the questions we're going to be talking about have to do with what characters are there with you. Who is it that is at your table?
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame. Our strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
The question of who is at your table is perhaps a confusing one because, of course, who's at your table are your friends, your connections, the people that you played with on a regular basis. But today we're going to be talking about who's at your table in terms of their practical roles. Now, of course, most people would say roles. Well, there are a couple of fighters and a rogue and perhaps a healer of some sort. But that's not what I'm speaking of. I'm not referring to these. I'm referring to metaphoric icons, those people that we really should have in our group. And although I'm going to be covering 10 personality types or 10 icons, so to speak, of role-playing, I'm not necessarily saying you have to have all 10 represented, but the reality is that each person brings with them several different characteristics or tendencies that they play with, and we're going to be looking at each of them and the pluses and the minuses, and to give you the suggestions, you might want to look at your games group in the perspective of how many of these roles are you actually able to fulfill within your group. Now, ideally, your entire group will cover the bases of these 10 categories, I suppose, but many of them will be one or two of these, and some may have 4 or 5. But the idea is that you want to think about your games group in perhaps a different way and see how many of these 10 you have at the table. Now, at the end, I'm going to also ask you to give me some feedback on that, but let's get going. And before we do that, make sure you hit all the buttons down below, like, subscribe, and make sure you share this with the game masters that you know in your games group, because we really want to get the word out to those who are running and administering the games to make sure that they can provide the best game mechanisms possible at your table. So we're first going to talk about the guy who stands in front. This is not necessarily a leader per se. Perhaps doesn't always have the brightest of ideas, but definitely is the one that is out there. He is in front. He tends to be the person who tries to make connection. He certainly wants to be identified in some aspects as being the guy in charge. And the figurehead may even be somebody who is perhaps a less prominent member of your party and yet is the one to which the others all look before they make decisions. And not that they're looking for assent, but they're looking perhaps for affirmation and confirmation of their actions. And so a figurehead is the person who likes the limelight, loves to be in front, and doesn't mind the dangers of being the first one to speak. Now, if your games group is completely filled with figureheads, you would know, because you'd have a hard time getting a word in edgewise between all of their announcements and proposals. But the idea of the figurehead is still somebody you need to have, someone who is the lightning rod for what information you have that you're bringing to the table, so that someone at least will be able to field those questions. Next, we're going to talk about the conscience. Now, in my games group, we literally had for a while a character who had as their familiar another player. This second person played functionally the Jiminy Cricket of the games group, and provided the level of awareness to the game that might not be there otherwise. If you have a party full of consciences, you will have a difficult time getting everything done because everyone will have a challenge to why that may or may not be a wise decision. But nonetheless, having a conscience really does allow your players to run the gamut in terms of the decisions they might recommend so that the players can all feel comfortable in being the one who helps to make the decisions. Next, you have the Jokester, and God love them. The problem with the Jokester is that they are constantly looking for a way that there might be a turn of the phrase in your game session. Perhaps you will utilize a double entendre that they want to draw attention upon. And the Jokester is absolutely necessary. You need to have somebody who's driving the entertainment aspect of the game. But these, of course, can be problematic if the Jokester doesn't understand that there's a control knob for turning up or turning down the amount of intent that the humor aspect can bring to the game. And so you want to provide them certainly with an opportunity to make their jokes, but also to learn to be long-suffering, because not every joke is going to land, and that's okay too. Next, we have the accountant, and while it's great to have somebody who pays attention to details, an accountant by itself can be a drag on the game if it's accounting for every possible jot and tittle that might show up in your game session. So grant your accountants the grace, if you will, to pursue the angles and the aspects of maintaining accuracy and perfection in the counting system, but don't drive it too far down the line. If you have an entire table of accountants, then you're probably playing a war game and not a role-playing game, to be honest, because the accountants do slow the game's mechanics down. It functionally is a place where the rule of law can get into opposition with the rule of cool, as it were. And who doesn't love the actor? I even say the name with embellish without putting the quotes in there, but the idea here is that a person who dives deep in the role play is an awesome asset to your table, and the more of the actors that you have at the table, the more flowing and dynamic your storytelling will be. But the actors, if they are the sole function, then you often don't even get to the adventure. You simply deal with the interpolitics and the social aspects of being involved in the action. And so having your players recognize that there is a time and a place to take the role of the actor and play it up is great. As a matter of fact, generally, as I said before, you may want to have characters slip from one or more of these roles into others, but just realize that the personal predilection of a player, if it is an actor, then you have to make sure that you not only provide them with a means to do so, but also a mechanism by which you can shift them into a different mindset so that the action can happen. Okay, so the next is the advocate, and this is the person who listens very carefully, usually ends up being one of the principal note takers in your group, and really focuses on the fairness and the equity that happens at your table. Happens at your table, and in doing so, they smooth out the rough spots in the game. Perhaps one player didn't understand the dynamics of the scene and therefore is about to recommend an action that is going to be ill-advised. It is the advocate that will step in and gloss down or smooth out those rough spots. Now, the challenge is that if everybody is an advocate, then everyone's going to be talking over each other, talking on top of each other's turns, and generally being a little bit on the bossy side, because an advocate usually not only wants to have to smooth out the rough spot, but they also want to avoid the rough spots altogether. And so, again, the fine-tuning of these dials within your players to adjust how much advocacy they're doing versus how much role play and so on. These targeting mechanics are still necessary, but they're not intended to run over one another. Right on top of that, you have the Negotiator, and the Negotiator generally loves the shopping trips, loves the haggling. The role of the Negotiator generally is player versus NPC, or players versus indirect actors, but the position of the Negotiator can itself also create a rough spot if there's way too much negotiating and not enough action. So realize that the appeal of a negotiator doesn't necessarily mean they want to take the action apart. They simply want to smooth out the rough spots. Now, this role, the Weeping Willow, is not as overt as it seems. A Weeping Willow can be as simple as perceiving affronts and perceiving threats when they aren't there, and they melt into the scene, and their reactions they're similar to the actor in that they are trying to present a case in the scene, but they often are doing so in a way that feels more victim related. They are looking for appeals to mercy, appeals to generosity, and so on. And the Weeping Willow is absolutely a useful item in your games group because it helps to make sure that you are covering the bases in terms of the social interaction that role-play games are meant to be. I do know certain players who advocate for a action-only game, and so they are playing a role-playing game not as a role-playing engine, but as a way to play through the scenes, and the taking on of roles is not as much of a focus for them. And so having one or two Weeping Willows in your group really does help to bring the humanity to the table and awareness of the conditions that the players' minds are in. And of course, at every table you need to have at least one cheerleader. Generally, you'll have two or three, or if you're really lucky, your entire table will be able to be cheerleaders for one another, rooting each other on, encouraging one another to take risks and to build up the excitement of the game. But a cheerleader still at some point has to do the action themselves, and so don't fall into the trap of advocating only for the cheerleader in that role. Allow them to also carry the mantles perhaps for one or more of the other roles in the table, because you want everyone to experience all facets of the gameplay experience. So now the questions I lean up to you is, what roles do you see at your table? Perhaps some of the ones that I've mentioned are easily recognizable among your groups. Sometimes perhaps you've overlooked one or more of these and don't have anybody who's advocating for that position. These are conversation points I'd love to have with you, so leave in a comment either what you do with the roles within your group, or perhaps what roles you see that I haven't covered. Now, do recall that we are doing these episodes 5 days a week. So if you like everything that's here, make sure you like and subscribe. And also at this point, I want to mention we are on the brink of a fundraising program, a crowdfunding project through BackerKit. That's in the links down below. And go check that out. And if you like them, let the system know. Subscribe to the BackerKit system and vote for it so that they will know that you are interested in the package. We are at this point sort of in a holding pattern. We have to establish a 34 or better player base in the mechanism in order to turn on the program. So although it is under BackerKit.com, And the link has to do with NycosRPG. I don't know, but it's down below. Make sure you give that a look, and I hope to see you in the next episode. I'd love to hear how games go at your house, and I will see you in the next time. Go play.